Okay, so this week's sources, you weren't kidding around when you said deep dive. Nietzsche, Foucault, Sherry Turkle. Wow. I mean, we're talking morality power and like our maybe unhealthy obsession with technology all in one. It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, it's a pretty heady mix. It really gets to the heart
Hmm.
of this question that's been haunting us for centuries. What does it mean to be human? Especially now that we're creating machines that could really blur those lines.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we're looking in a funhouse mirror, but like the reflections are coming from our phones and our smart homes and all the ways we're plugged in. Speaking of questioning reality, should we start with Nietzsche? That whole beyond good and evil thing always makes me think of like a supervillain monologue. But I know there's more to it than that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it. People often misunderstand Nietzsche. They think he's saying we should just throw out morality completely. But that's not really what he meant. He wasn't advocating for getting rid of morality. He wanted us to question it, to really dig into where it came from. He even said, at any rate, it does not mean beyond good and bad.
Okay, good. Because I don't know about you, but I kind of like the idea of our future robot overlords being at least a little bit on the good side. So what was Nietzsche really saying then?
He was really wary of any system that claimed to have a monopoly on truth, on what's right and wrong. That included religion, for example. He saw those systems as ways to control people, to kind of squash their individuality and creativity.
Yeah.
And this is where things get really interesting when we think about technology today. I mean, are we in the process of creating AI that could have its own sense of beyond good and evil, or
Yeah.
morality that we might not even understand?
Whoa, okay. You're blowing my mind a little bit. So it's not just about robots turning evil, it's about them potentially having a totally different way of thinking about good and bad, right? A system of ethics that we can't even comprehend because we're stuck in our own human way of seeing things.
You got it. And that's what Nietzsche wants us to confront, to never stop questioning, to dig deeper than the easy answers. He was challenging us to define our own values in a world that's constantly trying to do it for us. And honestly, I think that's more relevant now than ever with how fast technology is changing around us.
It's like he's up there somewhere with a glass of wine watching us tinker with our AI, saying, oh, you think you've got problems now. Just wait until they start questioning your whole moral code. And speaking of questioning systems of control, can we talk about Foucault's Panopticon? I mean, reading about it is one thing, but it's a whole different beast realizing we're kind of living in a digital version of it every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not just about being watched, you know. It's about internalizing that feeling of being watched.
Yeah.
Remember how the Panopticon worked?
Hmm.
It's not just about a guard seeing everything. It's about the prisoners knowing they could be watched at any moment and changing their behavior because of it,
Yeah.
even if they don't know for sure if anyone's looking.
Oh my gosh, yes. Like that feeling when you realize your phone camera was facing the wrong way and you're like, oh no, what did it record? And then you remember every other way you're being tracked online. Makes you want to throw your phone in the ocean and move to a deserted island sometimes.
Exactly. And that's what makes Foucault's work so unsettling, but so important. He was writing back in the 70s, long before smartphones and the internet as we know it. But he still managed to put his finger on this really unsettling pattern of surveillance and control that's just exploded in the digital age. Think about all the ways our data is constantly being collected and analyzed. Our search history, our location, our social media activity.
Yeah, it really is like that cliche scene in a spy movie where they pull up the map and there's a little blinking dot that shows exactly where the person is, except now we're all the blinking dot.
Right. And the scary part is we end up acting like those prisoners in the Panopticon. We start censoring ourselves online. We curate this perfect image because we're worried about algorithms and judgments. We end up conforming to these systems without even realizing it half the time.
And it's not just about self-censorship either, right? It's about how that data can be used to manipulate us, to shape our opinions and behaviors without us even knowing it's happening. Which actually reminds me of that quote you pulled from Foucault, where he talks about how punishment becomes selective. How does that tie into our digital lives? I'm curious.
Oh, for sure. So Foucault noticed that modern societies, they've moved away from those big public punishments, like executions. Instead, it's become much more about discipline, about making certain behaviors seem normal and acceptable while others are pushed to the margins. So in the Panopticon, those who follow the rules, those who internalize the guard's gaze, they get rewarded with the sense of security. But those who don't, well, let's just say it doesn't end well for them.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
Think about how that plays out on social media. The algorithms decide what you see. There's this pressure to fit in, to get likes and followers, to avoid saying the wrong thing and getting canceled. It's all digital discipline in a way.
Okay, yeah. It's like we're all stuck in this digital popularity contest where the rules keep changing and no one really knows how to win. But isn't that just kind of how we are as humans? I mean, haven't we always wanted to be part of a group, to be liked and accepted?
Of course, it's totally natural. But these platforms, they're designed to amplify those desires. With the algorithms and the notifications and everything, it's like this constant cycle of wanting validation and then questioning yourself.
Which is where Sherry Turkle comes in, right? Her book, Alone Together. It feels like it's more relevant now than ever.
Definitely, Turkle's work really gets at something important. It explains why we're so drawn to those simulated relationships with our devices. Even when we know deep down, it's not the same as connecting with another person. She makes the case that all this technology that's supposed to be connecting us might actually be making us feel more isolated and disconnected.
Which is kind of wild when you think about it, right? We've got all these amazing tools to communicate with anyone in the world, but we're lonelier than ever. Didn't Turkle have some really interesting examples in her research that showed this happening?
She did. Like, remember Miriam? She was the woman who found comfort in that robotic seal after her son moved out. She knew it wasn't a real animal, but she still formed this attachment to it. She found a kind of comfort in its presence, even though it wasn't really there in the same way. I think it was Turkle who said, and I'm going to try to quote this here, "The attachments I describe do not follow from whether computational objects really have emotion or intelligence, because they do not. The attachments follow from what they evoke in their users."
Wow, yeah. It's like we take our very human need for connection and we project it onto these machines. We fill in the emotional blanks ourselves.
Right. And it's not just about companionship either. Think about Edna, the woman who prioritized her, my real baby robot over her own granddaughter. That one always gets me.
It's both sad and a little creepy, right? Makes you wonder what we're doing to ourselves and what kind of future we're building. Are we really headed for a world where robots are our caregivers and best friends?
It's definitely something to think about. And Turkle asks those hard questions head on. If we can feel happy and fulfilled by a robot, does that change what it means to be human? Are we slowly losing our ability to empathize with each other, to really connect on a deeper level because we're so used to interacting with machines?
It reminds me of that if a tree falls in the forest thing. You know, if we're all so busy staring at our screens and interacting with our devices, are we even going to notice those real, raw human moments that make life worth living?
That's a great point. And you know what? It all circles back to what Nietzsche and Foucault were talking about.
Yeah.
They were both concerned with these systems, right? Whether they're philosophical or social or technological, these systems can end up controlling us in ways we don't even realize. They shape how we see the world, what we value, and ultimately who we become.
So let me get this straight. We're hurtling toward a future where algorithms understand us better than we understand ourselves, where robots are like vying for our emotional attention. And on top of all that, our definition of what it means to be human is totally up in the air. Honestly, I'm starting to feel a little freaked out here. Where do we even go from here?
Well, it's understandable to feel overwhelmed. That feeling you have, it means you're really grappling with these ideas. You're not shying away from the big questions. And that's a really good place to start.
Okay, so instead of like throwing my phone in the nearest lake and joining a silent retreat in the mountains, what can I actually do?
It starts with awareness.
Yeah.
You know, just paying attention to how technology is already influencing our lives, our relationships, our sense of self. We have to remember these technologies, they're not neutral. They come preloaded with certain values and assumptions, agendas that might not line up with our own.
Right, like those social media algorithms you mentioned earlier, the ones that keep showing us the same kind of content over and over again. It's like they're trapping us in these little echo chambers.
Exactly. And it's not enough to just be aware of it. We have to actively push back, develop our critical thinking skills, and encourage others to do the same. We need to demand more transparency and accountability from the companies that are creating these technologies.
So it's not about ditching our smartphones and hiding out in the woods, although honestly, sometimes that sounds pretty tempting.
It's tempting, for sure. But it's more about using technology intentionally, with awareness. We have a choice in every interaction with technology. We can either feed into those patterns of surveillance and manipulation and isolation, or we can choose a different path.
A path where technology actually makes us more human, where it helps us connect with each other more deeply and maybe even build a better world.
That's the goal. It's about reclaiming our agency, our ability to choose. We can shape technology in a way that reflects our values instead of letting it shape us.
Okay, I have one last thought experiment for our listeners. It's something I haven't been able to shake since we started this whole conversation. What if a robot could perfectly mimic empathy? Like, what if it could act in a way that seemed totally emotionally intelligent and compassionate? Would it really matter that those feelings weren't real?
That's a big one. It really cuts to the core of what makes us human. If we're willing to settle for simulated empathy from a robot, what does that say about our own capacity for empathy, for real human connection?
It's both exciting and a little terrifying to think we're about to live in a world with machines that can mirror us so well. But like we've been talking about with Nietzsche, Foucault, and Turkle, it all comes back to us. We're the ones creating this future.
And the choices we make now will determine what that future looks like. So choose wisely.
That's some serious food for thought. On that note, we'll leave you to ponder those robots, those algorithms, and what it all means for the future of humanity. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.